In this video, I'm going to show you how to make your pattern a bit more complicated and show you how you can exercise a bit more control over what's happening in it. So if you look at Vasarely's work, he applies the center of his image wherever he wants to do it because he's drawing it. And when you go on the spherize filter, it's preset to distort from where it wants to distort it, and you don't have any control over that. So if you have a look, all we can control is the size, the angle of the bulge, and whether it goes in or out, and we can't really control anything else about that. So there's a way, I'm just going to cancel that. There's a way where you can select a part of the image so that you can control where the distortion occurs. So we're going to use a selection tool. We're going to use the elliptical selection tool. If it's not there, be hiding behind the rectangle tool. And we're going to choose a fixed ratio so that you can draw a circle. So we'll draw a circle shape over the top of the image. Now you'll get a crosshair to move it around, and if you move it up and down you should be able to centralize it, and you'll see that it's central with the red lines. So this shape is where the distortion will occur. So it means that none of this part will be distorted, or this part. Okay, I could draw a smaller circle if I want to. It just means that I can control where the distortion goes. So I'll show you. If I now add the spherize filter, it will only apply it to that section in the center. Okay, so in some ways then we've got some control of where the distortion happens. So you can say okay if you want to apply that and do some select, deselect to it so that you can see what's happening. Another thing that Vasarely does is that he has some blending effects. So he has maybe the center of it is lighter and the outside is darker. So if we go back and we select that area, we can keep that light, and then we can work on the background to change that so that the center of it stays lighter. So if I've still got the selection on, I can do a select inverse, which means select the opposite. So now I've got the background selected, so all the bit that isn't distorted, the bit that's still flat, and none of the circle selected. So I can do things like change the brightness or contrast in that area. So I'm essentially making the background darker. So you can see that I've made the background darker. It shows you a preview. And then so now this appears much, much lighter. So I could say okay to that. So that's one way of creating a difference. Select, deselect. Now, if you want to work on it again, you do need to make sure that you've got the selection. So we could do things as well, like change the colours. So we could do image hue saturation, and we could change the colour of the background, but not the sphere. And we can make it very intense or less intense, more grayed out, things like that. So you need to make sure you've got things selected away from what's around it so that you can apply some transformations. Okay, I'm going to go back and I'm going to show you something else that you can do. So I do now have this sphere selected in the center. I'm going to undo that. And I'm going to show you a really cool thing that you can do. So there's the gradient tool, which we're always getting rid of because we want the paint bucket, is actually a very useful tool. So I'll just show you what a gradient does, and it will just cover this picture. So a gradient is a blend from one colour to another. At the moment, the colours that I've got selected are black to pink because that's the colours that I've got here. So if I just click and drag, it will cover my whole image in black to pink with a linear gradient, which means it does it in a line. So if I was to use a radial gradient, that makes a light area and a dark area around it, okay, which is quite cool. So an angular one kind of comes from an angle and creates it in a strange way. So there's different gradients that you can use. We are going to use a radial gradient. So I'm just going to undo what I did. And you'll notice that the gradient actually just went over my picture and made it disappear. So you can see that my image just disappeared. That's because I'm on a normal mode. You can change the mode and it will mean that you can still see some of your image underneath it. So I'll just show you what I mean. So if I go on the darken mode and I use the radial gradient, so I'm going to draw from the center and pull out, or near to the center and pull out. And you can see that I have created like a circle in the middle, and then the outside has gone dark. So obviously that mode is not very good because I can't see any of the pattern around it. So I need to try some of the different modes. So I'm just going to go back and try perhaps maybe a screen mode. So it's a process of trial and error. So you can see that with the screen mode, I've lightened the center. Okay, so I could try maybe a linear burn. Each time you'll have to undo it on the history and then try it again and see what that looks like. So the linear burn gets rid of the surrounding, but I could change the opacity so that it doesn't go on very heavily. So if I show you again, using the linear burn, I've kind of got a bit of lightness in the middle and a bit of darkness around the outside. So maybe I need to make it a bit more obvious by increasing the opacity and then try it again. Okay, so this time I've kind of maybe achieved more like what I wanted to do. It's not quite central, so you need to make sure you are on the center and that you are dragging as far as you want it to go to get it where you want it to be. So this is maybe a bit more like what I want. So then if I went on filter, distort, spherize, this time I would get a sphere that is lighter in the center and darker towards the outside. Okay, so we'll go back. So you keep playing around with these different possibilities and see what they do. Make sure you're on the central square. Oh, so that's completely changed the colour, hasn't it? Completely changed it. And on Vassarelli's, some of that does happen. We could try making the opacity go right to the top, see if that has a difference. So it's a case of trial and error to get what you want. So I think probably to get what I want, I'm going to drag it further out. So I'm going to start in the center and I'm going to drag right beyond the edge. So I definitely get a coloured circle in the middle. So the bigger I drag it, the more effect it has. So if I go to filter, distort, spherize now, then I'm going to get some kind of green circle in the center of other colours that are around it. So then if I wanted to select that circle and do things to it, I would need to use the elliptical marquee. So I'll show you. So if we draw just a circle about the right sort of size, and then you use the move tool to get it exact. So then I can now apply effects to the background by selecting the inverse, and then I could try and darken down the background or change the colours in it. So I think I will darken it down and see what that looks like. Let's make it much darker and say okay. And then if I deselect, I should be able to see what I've done. So you can see that I'm making it more complicated by using different effects. And because I've made there be an odd number, I've got now a central square. So I'm making the pattern more complicated and more interesting. So I'd like you to play around. So each time you like it, do File, Export as JPEG, say Save, and then it will be there saved in your drive for you to put in a slideshow, and just use the history to go back and to try different radial gradients over the top So also the colour might have an effect on what you're actually doing. So you could choose different gradients from here. So you could choose a black and white gradient maybe and see if you worked with a colour dodge. What effect does that have? So we're on full opacity at the moment. So let's see what that does. That's really nice. But maybe it might look really good if it was slightly lighter so that I could actually see more of the surrounding outside parts. So let's try that. So I've gone beyond the edge of the screen. So this time it's lightening the background. Okay, so I want you to just play around with those ideas and see what you can manage to do. So you could also, I'm just going to show you actually, you could also apply gradients and things whilst it's flat. So if we get the ellipse tool, I'll draw myself a circle for where I want it to go, and I'll just move it centrally. Okay, so now I can select the inverse and I can do things like fill it with a gradient now. So I can fill with a radial gradient and go like this, and it will fill the outside and sort of blend it towards the centre. Maybe a colour dodge wasn't the best thing to do. So let's have a go. Go from the central square out to the outside. Okay, that one's not so brilliant. So let's maybe pull that up to the top and see what this does. Probably better not to work on top of other gradients. So I'm going to try it now on the pure thing. Oh, I'm on the middle. So I'm going to select the inverse and then I'm going to try it again. So hopefully this will darken the outside. Yeah. So just have a look at what it does. So if I go back before I did the gradient and then I finish it within that area, maybe it will go even darker. I don't think that had an effect, did it? Okay, so then you can do things like select inverse if you're going to work on it flat, and then add the filter distort spherize onto here. You can also do things like you can select sections. So if we deselect a second, we can do what we did last week and we can select parts of the image. So we can go and select, say, a quarter, and we can add a gradient to that. Lots and lots of possibilities of what you could do. So let's do a colour burn this time, and we'll work from the centre to there. So we've colour burnt from the centre, and then we can select another section. So this is all about experimenting with what you could possibly do with what I'm showing you. So we can draw, you could make it even and do a colour burn on this side as well. And then, so you can apply all the effects before you do the 3D distortion. So remember when you're drawing, you're just going to have to gauge it and then try and move it so it's central. It's a little bit too small. I could draw it again, or I could just apply it to that. I might get a little bit of an edge where I don't want one, but I'm just showing you quickly. So I did get a bit of an edge. But here, this is how you can sort of develop and improve your outcomes. You could also, I'm just going to show you one more thing because somebody did it last week and it was really nice. So let's just go back. So remember to save any parts that you like. In fact, I'm just going to save that. Do File, Export as JPEG. say save. Okay, and then I'm just going to go back and I'm going to choose, I think maybe here, yes. Okay, we don't need the ellipse select. So we're going to go back to rasterized style. So now somebody did this in the boys class last week and it looked really good. So you could select a whole stripe, whole strip of it and lighten it or darken it or change the colours of it. So we could do image, adjustments, hue saturation, let's say. Let's try that and see what that looks like. So I'm changing the middle stripe to different colours. Okay, and then I'll do select, deselect, and then I could choose individual squares if I wanted to as well, but I'm going to go for this central line also. And then I'm going to change that, do image, adjust, hue saturation. And I'll change it this time to, well, let's choose some colours that I think go well. Do you know what? Maybe I might just darken it down a bit and increase the saturation. Okay. So now when you apply a filter, you will get like a band of different colour, which looks really nice as well. So that's another thing that you could do. Isolate and select parts and then just apply effects to those so that you're messing with the image quite a lot. So we'll do File, Export as JPEG and save all these different versions together. Okay, so I look forward to seeing what you come up with.